I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the 6 p.m. work session. Kim.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As the staff prepares to submit the fiscal year 2022 city budget to the City Council in mid-August, we now seek direction from you on what rates to assume for the water and sewer for the next calendar year. In 2017, the city, with the help of Retelis, completed a rate study which we have used to set our rates for the last few years. However, shortly after that study was completed, the city's mag meter at the Bedford station, which measures the wastewater volumes going into Kansas City, was replaced, and we saw significant increases in volumes from previous years. Also, the capital needs in both utilities have increased, causing the need to conduct a new rate study. In 2021, the city engaged Retelis to conduct a water and wastewater rate study. City staff did present to you a memo that outlines their comprehensive review of the city's rates, customer demands, operating expenses, and capital needs. Working closely with city staff, we have developed two scenarios for the water and wastewater utilities. Just a little bit of background. For the past 2 years, the utilities have relied on transfers from the gaming fund to meet basic capital requirements. Absent a rate increase, the water and wastewater utility funds will feature a negative cash balance by the end of 2022. Retelis recommends that the city take steps to ensure that each utility becomes financially self-sufficient and is able to adequately reinvest into the water and wastewater systems using only rate revenue. Retelis will present two different paths this evening that the city can take to adequately fund balance for both utilities while ultimately removing the reliance on the gaming fund for capital expenditures. And with that, I would like to turn it over.
Thank you, Kim. My name is Tom Beckley. I'm a vice president with Retelis. I work here in the Kansas City office for Retelis. 10-second overview. We're a national firm that provides financial and management consulting to utilities, municipal utilities throughout the country. So this is pretty much our bread and butter, doing these types of analyses for utilities. So tonight I'm going to present to you our findings, and I'll start with a brief overview of the utility just to kind of make sure we all have a common understanding of the services that the city provides in terms of water and wastewater services. And then I'll talk to you about the rate study process and some important considerations when we're undertaking a study like this. And then we'll go over each water scenarios and sewer scenarios. And as Kim mentioned, there's two scenarios we'll talk about for each similar scenarios. And finally, I'll open it up for any final discussion and questions. This is a work session. I encourage you, if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and I'm happy to stop and talk about it. You know, I don't want us to it makes more sense sometimes to talk about it as the questions come up so we can all know what the specific question relates to. Yes, sir.
Turn this mic on, thank you. I have a basic question in terms of the whole premise that we're operating under and that you've been operating under in developing your study. And in one, the gaming fund was initially and has been used since its inception for capital improvements. Some of the first ones were relining the pipes in the city. And that's been one of the primary dedicated uses of the fund in a way. And the whole premise of both your scenarios is that water services and wastewater treatment should be self-funded. We don't do that for police, fire, courts, or even the streets. As far as I know, we don't have any toll roads. And I don't really understand. Maybe you can explain it to me.
So let me
Why this is different than everything else we do.
Absolutely. And I'm going to address that in the first couple of slides, then I'll come back to that question within the first few slides, okay? If we can do the introduction, because I think this introduction will help me better address that question, if you'll allow me. But I won't get far before I come back to that, just to make sure that we answer that. So just talking, I I want to give a brief overview of the water and sewer utilities, just to make sure everybody understands, because there is a key difference between water and sewer we're going to talk about here tonight. So when we talk about our water utility, we have a water treatment plant down here at the end of the street, down here at the end of Armour, and it provides about 1.1 billion gallons a year to the 2,500 customers in the city. We have several wells over there in the area of the water treatment plant. Ingredion purchases about 56% of the water. The average residential customer uses 3,300 gallons per month. So an important consideration here is we have a water treatment plant. On the flip side, when you think about our sewer utility, we do not treat our own sewage flow. So we have a sewage collection system only, and then we send it down to Buckeye Station down here on the east side of the city, and it gets pumped then to a Kansas City sewage treatment plant. And so a big portion of our cost for the sewage utility is that those treatment charges from Kansas City, which we have very little control over. So it's an important consideration that we have a lot more flexibility on the water side because we actually control our own destiny, whereas on sewer we're somewhat tied to Kansas City. And this is what I wanted to talk about a little bit before I address your question, the overall financial planning process. And this is pretty similar for most utilities. However, you'll see here, one of the things we have here is the funding mix for capital projects. And the decision that's been made in North Kansas City here traditionally is, well, how are we going to pay for that? Excuse me. How much gaming are we going to use and how much cash revenue, cash generated from the actual utility operations? For a vast majority of municipal utilities in this country, and even here in North Kansas City, they are enterprise funds. And the way enterprise funds typically operate is they are expected to be self-sufficient enterprises, businesses. They are expected to operate on their own. Unlike, general fund, which generates tax revenue, which isn't related to the services it provides, and then uses tax revenue to provide services. Utilities are expected to provide a set service for a set price and expected to be self-sufficient in a vast majority of cases. Now, there are other exceptions. You guys are not entirely unique, but the presence of this gaming fund is somewhat unique for the city of North Kansas City. And even when we did our last study in 2017, one of the key questions we were answering in that study was how to pay for the upgrades that are occurring at the water plant now. Because the discussion was, should it be cash funded? Should we issue debt for it? Or should we just go ahead and use gaming fund? And even with the gaming fund, there was a discussion at the time of whether or not the utilities should pay back the gaming fund for those monies. Ultimately, the decision was made in 2017, no, the gaming fund is just going to pay for those upgrades and not expect to be paid back by the utility. So it keeps our rates lower than they would be if that was a self-supporting business. So to answer your question, one of the general premises typically for utilities is that they are self-supporting. And one of the reasons that's important, I believe, here in North Kansas City is you have one very large industrial customer, Ingredion. And to the extent you're supporting the utility with gaming funds, you're supporting Ingredion with gaming funds. And so that's why it may make sense for us to consider we want to have the utilities self-supporting, because then not only are the citizens paying their share of the utility costs, but all of our large corporate industrial customers are Ingredion, U.S. Gypsum, so forth. Because here in North Kansas City, it's more businesses than residential when we look at who is using our water and sewer utilities. So that's why now I've said that, but it is fundamentally up to this commission, this council, whether or not, if you want to use gaming fund, that's certainly your discretion. That is absolutely your prerogative. That is this elected body's prerogative, how to spend that gaming fund money, is my understanding. And so if you want to continue to support the utilities, that's different than the two options we're presenting today, because in working with city staff to get to this meeting, and this is why we're having a work session, because this is not a final answer. This is information we have, and we've worked with city staff, and they've indicated that they believe it's in the best interest of the city, based on our discussions, to move away from that paying for utility services with gaming funds. But if you elect to do that, that's certainly your prerogative.
Yeah, before we put that on, I guess one of my concerns is that one of the one of the rationales for having a self-sufficient enterprise is that so it can be sold. And that's been done at other places in the country. Water and wastewater have been sold to private entities to run them. And I would be totally against that. Now, I don't know if that's a part of what this self-sustaining enterprise effort is, but I would be against.
Well,
I just want to go on that record now.
I've been involved in some transactions either being considered or that were consummated, and typically the reason that communities will sometimes consider selling their utilities is because they're in bad financial condition, not because they're in good financial condition. If it's because there may be a point in 15 years in the future where, in my personal opinion, the gambling landscape is changing. With sports gambling, online gambling, what's going to happen? And Bally's KC is going to do a huge renovation on their casino. We don't know what impact that'll have on Harrah's. There may be a point in 15 years in the future where we're subsidizing the utilities and all of a sudden the money's not in the gaming fund. And that's where we would potentially really be in a pickle. That's just kind of, why I would say you might want to consider having the utilities be self-sufficient and not dependent on gaming fund. Nobody knows what's going to happen with that. Hopefully it'll continue to provide the city with a source of funding for, all the projects you pay for. North Kansas City is a great community. I don't live here. I live a little further north, but, I know all the great things that you guys do for your citizens. And it's a great city, and, it's an admired city. But, that's why, from my perspective, as somebody who works for water and sewer utilities throughout the country, as I mentioned, I'm just giving you our perspective, and in talking with city staff, they're the ones who indicated that they thought it was in the best interest of the city to move away from funding the utilities. And especially, what's happened is, it was one thing in 2017, we made the decision to pay for the water plant upgrades with gaming fund revenue. And that was it. And that's all we had in the financial plan at the time. Whereas now what's happened, the recommendations we made were not completely implemented. And now, in effect, what's happened is more than just that water plant is being paid for with gaming fund. And that's where I think even if you decide to continue using gaming fund for some capital improvements, you may want to be a little more careful on which ones are actually being funded with gaming fund. And more specific, it's because it's becoming more of a general funding source for the utilities than even was envisioned when we did our study 4 years ago.
I would say it sounds like you're on top of gaming too. Do you also study that?
It's just a hobby.
Kim, did you have something you want to add to that?
No, you addressed our concerns very well. We have absolutely no intention, at least at the staff level, unless the city council directs us to ever put our utility up on the market for sale.
And I think kind of the best practice, as you mentioned, we've been going towards is really removing a lot of these where we keep funding these things and keep propping them up. Just have them be more self-sufficient. I think as he hit it, as I've gone to other communities that have sold theirs, they're usually in a bad financial situation. They don't know what else to do. They don't know how to manage it. It's horrific.
Yep.
I think here we're talking something a little bit more minor, but please go ahead. Did you have anything else, Councilmember Saper? Okay.
Okay. All right. So, overall financial planning process, now that we've kind of gone on this huge digression, is, we look at, there's two key aspects. Fund balance, which we'll talk about a little bit throughout this presentation, what the fund balances look like for each water and sewer individually, and the capital funding mix, which here we have gaming fund, which has been used to pay for a lot of funding and more in recent years. So in general, some financial plan assumptions that we have built into our model that I want to talk about. Inflation, 7% annual increase for wastewater treatment. This is the cost we pay Kansas City. And one challenge on wastewater treatment is we used to be third or fourth largest wholesale customer for Kansas City. We are going to be the first or second largest wholesale customer because several of the other large wholesale customers for Kansas City have gone and built their own treatment plants or done something else to get their flow. Liberty used to be one of the large customers. They built their own treatment plant at a significant cost, even more than they ever expected when they first explored that option. Johnson County is another large wastewater customer, and they're basically making it so that they can send it to their own treatment plant that they already have instead of sending it to Kansas City. So there's been some pressure. Kansas City has done its best because, quite frankly, they're concerned about losing more wholesale customers because it just makes it more difficult for them. We have 5% inflation for other utilities and benefits because, as everybody probably well knows, benefits increase, pretty quickly. And then we have 3% inflation just to be a little conservative on all of their expenses. A year ago that may seem high. Nowadays, I'm not. That's really pretty a safe assumption, we think. And it's not as conservative as it used to be. Overall, each of the water and sewer utilities has $8 million in total capital expenditures of the period 2022 through 2027. Yes, sir.
Question here on this slide, when you're talking about zero account usage growth, I know that, we're building some new apartments, and those will be additional customers that the people who rent them may not pay the water
Yes.
usage, but the apartment people will. Can you explain, have you factored in the new apartments that we're building into this account growth?
No, we haven't really factored in. Basically, we're assuming that the account and usage that exists right now will stay flat. Now, it's a combination factor, too, because one interesting thing we see with utilities throughout the country is even when accounts are growing, usage, because we get significant revenue from our volume rates, is actually declining on a per capita basis. So we could add those accounts, and they would offset maybe a small portion of rate increases. It's important to recognize, though, especially on the sewer side, it's not going to make a big difference because a lot of our expense is related to what we pay Kansas City anyway. So it would have a smaller impact on sewer than it would water. On water, there would be some impact. Even then, water apartments tend to be relatively low per capita consumption water users. They may have a little bit of landscaping, but they have very little outdoor usage, and indoor usage is even usually relatively efficient, especially compared to existing residential. So it's a conservative assumption, basically, is kind of where I'm getting at. We're just trying to be safe and not count on those apartments coming so that we can keep rates 1 or 2% lower. In the end, in 4 years, when you look at this again, if those apartments come on and they start using a lot of water, it's going to decrease a future rate increase by 1, maybe 2%, but it's not going to have a huge impact. And so we're trying to be conservative here in our efforts to get the utilities to be self-sufficient. Okay. So first we'll talk about the water utility. And so just to refresh everybody's memory who may not have their water utility rate schedule memorized, basically our charges consist of a fixed monthly charge, which increases by meter size, and that's pretty typical. It represents larger meters have a larger what we call readiness to serve cost. We've built more infrastructure to serve them. And our rates include the first 3,500 gallons of water usage. So if you only use 3,500 gallons or less a month, you pay that fixed charge, and that is all you pay. And then we have a declining block structure. So the more water you use, the lower the cost. And this is really meant to recognize more commercial and industrial usage, that when you have higher levels of usage, it tends to be commercial usage and then even higher industrial usage, which has a lower cost because they tend to peak less than residential users. So that's not uncommon to see what we call the declining block rate structure. One important consideration on the water utility is we have decreased our rates by approximately 24% from 2018 to 2021. So you can see even on the schedule I have here, the fixed charge for a 5/8 inch meter has gone from 1930 to 1482. So, yes, sir.
Okay, can you help me understand, 5/8 is that a residential meter?
5/8 is a typical residential
3/4
meter.
on up is where we get, okay.
Well, if you put a new connection, is it 3/4?
I think it's 3/4.
Yeah,
So
I thought it was 3/4.
it's kind of well, we have a lot of 5/8 existing though because
Older infrastructure, yeah.
It's 5/8 used to be the standard, now 3/4 is.
Okay. So the first two are going to be categories for residential, and the rest are going to be
Yeah.
commercial and industrial.
Yeah, any resident who has a 1 inch meter has a
doing
specific
something
need
else,
for,
right?
yeah, they either heavy irrigation, some kind of fancy toilet or something. But yeah, residential will be in that 5/8, 3/4 inch
Thank
range.
you.
But yeah, we've decreased our rates by 24% across the board. And it's important to note that that was not our recommendation in 2017. we had 3% annual increases, on the water utility to kind of provide a level increase of funding for the utility. Yes, sir.
I was on the council at that time, and I just a little historical knowledge at the time is that the sewer rates were increasing so much from Kansas City, and that's why we reduced the water rates to kind of offset the pain to the residents. So just kind of an FYI
Yeah.
on why we did that. Now, I mean, certainly things have changed in sewer rates we don't have any control over, but thank you.
Yeah. And one thing to keep in mind, my last bullet point there is our water rates are very low right now. When you look at a residential customer with 5/8 inch meter using 4,000 gallons a month, which is, a typical customer, it's $15.40 a month, and that's almost half of, similar communities in our area. Yes, sir. Not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any communities that have low, I can't even, this is low nationally, any way you want to look at it. $15.40 per month for water is extremely low.
Okay, so there aren't any in the metro that are lower?
Not that
Okay.
I'm aware of. I
Okay, it
mean,
wasn't on the chart, so that's why I asked.
No.
Thank you.
This is extremely, 1540 is extremely low throughout the country. So, as we've lowered our rates 25%, what we've gone from is being cheap to being very cheap. We think this is important to keep in mind that, compared to other similar utilities, they're very low right now because we are going to have to make some changes to this. So we're going to talk about two financial plan scenarios. For both water and wastewater, the financial plan scenarios are similar. And like I said, this is a work session. We haven't come to a final answer. If the council elects to continue providing higher levels of gaming fund revenue, we can certainly make adjustments to these financial plans pretty easily and make those changes. But based on our discussions with staff, the two scenarios, we decided to look at for tonight's discussions are to rely on transfers from gaming fund for 5 years and then phase them out, basically, phase out the transfers. So still continue to provide some funding for both water and sewer for 5 years until we can eliminate them completely, and basically they would be self-sufficient at that point, each water and sewer. So on the water side, that would require a 68% increase from 2021 to 2027, which I understand is a very daunting number, but keep in mind that slide we just looked at, we would still be the lowest among all those communities, and I can promise you in the next 6 years, most of those communities will be raising their rates as well. Maybe not as much as this, but we would be the cheapest even today if we raised our rates 68% compared to those communities. And something to keep in mind is if we hadn't done the 24% decrease, this really mimics the 3% annual increases we had recommended back in 2017, kind of just undoing the 24% and then getting back to what we had recommended. And then scenario 2 would be to eliminate gaming fund transfers immediately. This is a little more drastic, no question. It puts both utilities immediately self-sufficient without funding from the gaming fund. And this is just kind of, let's pull the Band-Aid off and get there. And this would require an 88% increase from 2021 to 2027. Again, we would still be the cheapest on that chart I showed you if we raised our rates 88% today, and we're not even proposing that. This is 88% over several years. So you can see here, this is kind of an overview of the financial plan for scenario 1. The light blue line is the revenue under existing rates. So basically it's a flat line. It's how much revenue we generate today and how much we would generate over the next several years, assuming the 0% growth assumptions we've used to be conservative. And the darker blue line is what we're proposing. And you can see our expenses are actually a little higher than that. And we have gaming fund. Those gold bars in there are the gaming fund transfers. Right now, we have pretty large gaming fund transfers to help pay for those improvements at the water plant, but even in the future, we would need some gaming fund revenue to help pay for our more routine annual improvements until we can phase that out by 2027. And one important consideration is days cash, and this will vary dramatically from water and sewer. Water actually has a pretty good fund balance right now. We'd like this to be at least 90, 120, so which is basically 3 to 4 months. This is money in our checking account to make sure that we're not living paycheck to paycheck in a way, just waiting for somebody to pay their bill so we can pay somebody else. So, 90 to 120 is a pretty standard amount to have in here. And you can see we're above that now. We're going to spend it down a little bit, but then get it back up to where we want. And at the end of 2027, be just over 4 months in this days cash in this account. And in terms of CIP funding sources, when we look at how much CIP we have a higher amount right now as we finish the water treatment plant, and then we get to more routine, about $1 million to $1.5 million a year for the next 5 years after that, with a mix of rate-funded capital, which is from our rates, and then gaming fund as well. Until 2027, it would all be rate-funded capital. So in terms of rates, what are we really talking about? What's the impact on our customers? Right now, that 5/8 inch customer pays a $14.80 fixed charge, and we're proposing increasing that $1.50 to $2 per month each year. They would see that much increase, and so it would go from $14.82 for the fixed charge to $24.89. So your folks, your little old lady on a fixed income living in a small house is probably using 3,500 gallons or less a month, unless they're doing a lot of outdoor gardening. And so their bill would go from $14.82 to $24.89, which, we don't want to minimize the impact that has on some people. But again, keep in mind, this would still put us below any, basically every other community we looked at in most communities, period, especially at the end of 6 years. So this is a customer impact. So you can see the total impact of different size customers, including the first one is our typical residential, using that 4,000 gallons a month we looked at before, going, in this case, from $15.40 to $25.88 after 6 years. And so, again, about a $10 per month increase in the bill. Yes, sir.
In the budgets you're laying out, is that an actual annual increase, or is it going monthly? Like, does the rate move up each month?
It goes up once a year for that. That's a monthly bill, and it changes once a year.
Gotcha. If we were to taper it up monthly, would that change the number significantly where we'd have front-loaded income coming in?
Wouldn't we have to have a lot of public meetings to do that?
Would we have to
'Cause every
change
time-
it?
Not only that, there would be considerable staff burden.
Really?
And, well, because that would have to be hand-coded every month, and the risk of error, I think, would increase. I'm not trying to speak for Nick, but
Sure.
there would be some consideration on logistics and current staffing levels.
Okay. Is that because our system's a little bit less user-friendly, or?
Well, yeah, the hand coding would be part of it, but also noticing that up, and we have to provide 30 days notice.
Okay. I didn't know if we could
rates as they are
approve,
right now.
like, front end, say we would approve it as a monthly increase rather than having to approve it each time we increased it.
I hate to say we're getting into Tarm Barz's area, but we would have to check the Missouri state statutes.
Okay.
On that particular, we do have to have public hearings, and some of today's work session is to get some understanding of the rates that you guys would like to see reflected in the proposed budget, so we can do that public noticing within the timeline that is acceptable with the state.
Okay. Okay.
So the second scenario, a more immediate elimination of the gaming fund, and you can see the gold bar goes from, in 2021, is completely eliminated, started in 2022, which is the gaming fund transfer, would require larger upfront increases and then smaller future increases. And so we'd be looking at 2020 and 15, which are pretty dramatic increases, but we wanted to kind of give you this option of eliminating that completely, more immediately, excuse me. And even under this scenario, you can see we more dramatically have a negative impact on days cash on hand, where we get down much lower than we'd like to be before we build up back up to the levels that really are healthy for a utility fund. And so you can see the impact here on the fixed charge from $14.82, it goes to $27.38, which is about a $12.50 increase instead of a $10 increase. So in the end, we're not talking about a huge dramatic impact on the customers in terms of total bill. It's a $2.50 more, but it's certainly not nothing. Similarly, when you look at typical bills, and you know, one we have on here that I'll point out too is we have Ingredion, our largest customer on this as well at the bottom. So you can see their bills would change, you know, increase dramatically from 69,000 to 130,000. But again, this is kind of one of those points I was making. You have to keep in mind, these subsidies to the utilities, they're not just going to our residents, they're going to the corporate customers as well. So similarly on the sewer utility side, sewer utility rates are a little more straightforward. They're not a tiered structure. They have a fixed charge by meter size, but you'll see the volume rate's just a flat, it's a uniform volume rate regardless of usage, which is pretty typical. And then we also have high-strength surcharges for some of our large industrial customers that put excess pollutants in the wastewater. And this is something that we pay for to Kansas City as well for those volumes. Yes.
Why is there? Thank you for that. Why is there a uniform volume on wastewater?
Because the way cost of service for wastewater works is there's not the same peaking as there is on the water utility, in part because wastewater collection systems actually have the ability to dampen peaks even within the collection systems themselves. The difference in water volume rates is driven by peaks. It's driven by the fact that a residential customer who peaks is typically a customer who irrigates in the summer. So they're irrigating in the summer, and so say they use, on their peak day, they're using 10,000 gallons a day. But they're only using 10,000 gallons a day maybe 60 days out of the year. But we have to have the capacity to provide them 10,000 gallons a day 365 days a year. Ingredion, on the other hand, for the same 10,000 gallons a day they're using it every single day. So we've built 10,000 gallons of capacity for Ingredion, and they use it 365 days out of the year. So that's how you can justify a lower volume rate for a larger industrial or commercial customer, because they use water more consistently throughout the year, typically. Now, there's always exceptions to these, but that's kind of the general, that's the philosophy behind how you justify those rates on a cost of service basis. And quite frankly, when you look at how little our change in volume rate for the water is not very significant. It's like less than 10% from the low volume user to the high volume users, and really doesn't fully recognize those cost of service differences to the benefit of our residential customers. Yes, sir.
Question, this may be for staff, but have we, I know we were looking into the meter when it was replaced, and have we checked it to make sure that it is functioning properly?
We are having a company look at the calibration just to make sure it is set correctly.
Good.
Now-
Along that same thing, the I&I that we were talking about looking into, is that covered later on, or is that something that are we still studying that? Because we're paying for that wastewater to be treated, whether it's used or not here.
Yeah, so I&I is a complex issue, and I don't know if Anthony wants to talk about this too. And
It's
we've
off
spent a
topic.
lot of time talking about this. So the city's going to undertake a water, sewer, and stormwater master plan here in the very near future, is what I'm told. And
Let me jump in on that. There are 3 separate studies.
yes,
Right.
3 separate studies. Yeah. Which will help address the I issue. For now, we're not doing anything to eliminate I&I. That's beyond the scope of our financial study.
Okay.
But eventually, especially once you get all 3 of those studies, we've included $8 million for water and sewer funding. And sewer includes some stormwater funding too. We're not getting super precise on that, but right now, you are paying for what could be classified as stormwater projects in your sewer utility. Ultimately, the city will have to make a decision if you want to do what a lot of communities are doing, which is establish a third utility for stormwater, which will have a different basis for charge, because the basis for recovering stormwater cost isn't directly tied to wastewater volumes. There are other measures of each customer's impacts that better measure their impact than sewer flow. And so that's a decision you'll have to make in the future. For now, we're funding it through wastewater, which is not ideal, but a lot of communities do that, especially here in Missouri, quite frankly, because there have been some issues with establishing stormwater utilities in the state of Missouri. But it's something you will have to consider in the future.
So I'm going to jump in on that just one second. You're getting a peek into the proposed budget.
No.
We, just like any great study, it answers a lot of questions and it raises others. So within the proposed budget, and we'll be discussing this at the upcoming work sessions, is 3 upcoming studies that we'd be asking the city council to consider within future funding years. And that is a stormwater. We would be kicking it off with stormwater. We will be requesting that within this the fiscal year 2022. And then sewer and water. So, and some of what this study is impacting those requests for more studies so that we have an understanding, and he kind of hit on it. Some of the questions, a future question might be, does the city want to undergo separating these funds?
Okay.
Kind of a random place for me to ask this question, but was any part of this, were you able to determine or get any idea about the percentage of non-revenue water? Are you able to tell? Referring to, okay, so when it leaves the plant.
We
and
have,
then, and then being billed at the end, what kind of loss
well,
happens?
non-revenue water would typically refer on the
I'm sorry,
water
I might have used
utility.
it.
Lost water, which
Lost
is
water.
something.
There we go.
But we did not take a deep dive in non-revenue water or inflow and infiltration. We just, we looked at how much is being sent to Kansas City, how much that costs us. Now, without getting into too much details, one of the challenges we're facing is part of the increased cost to Kansas City are increasing surcharge for this BOD and suspended solids, which is basically pollutants in the water. And our costs have been increasing to Kansas City, but our revenues have also been increasing from Ingredion. However, in undertaking this study, the amount of surcharge revenue and expenses is increasing rapidly to the fact that it's becoming, we need to take a closer look at that. And it's something that needs, there needs to be further examination done on that, because it used to be, and this is rough order of magnitude, maybe not precise, it used to be like 10% of the sewer budget. It's now getting to the point where it's 25% of the sewer budget. And that is a very high number compared to similar utilities.
Well, that was going to be a separate question. Sorry, I waited to ask my water question during sewer.
Okay.
That was on me. But yeah, that was going to be my other one too, was.
And that, I'm sorry, I keep jumping in on you here. Again, some of the results of a really great study are to answer a lot of questions, but also to uncover other questions for us to ask later. One of the things that, at least at the staff level, we are considering is asking Reftelis to dive into the issue that they just outlined. It is outside of the scope of the current services within this particular study, but it is enough of there are enough unanswered questions that we have at the staff level that, should the city council be amenable, we would ask for them to take a deeper dive into that to help us understand what's going on.
So the INI hasn't been studied at all? I mean, I know we talked about smoke testing and stuff like that, because that's a pretty big component of what we're paying for.
That's a study that's going to keep going, I think. You know,
Okay.
we'll have to do some more smoke testing and additional INI, but this is kind of a separate component of the bill, which is
Gotcha.
the pollutants in the water.
Right, yeah, as we're talking about budgeting though, just how much, I mean, as an anecdote, I've been into houses that the sump pump is plumbed right into the main sewer drain line. That's huge amount of INI, so
Yes.
if we can start rooting that out, that would be pretty big for our sewer budget. Anyways,
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. It's something I was actually doing some research on for another client in the past couple of weeks, is that can be a large source of inflow and infiltration in the system, is foundation drains and sump pumps that are discharging to the city
Right.
utility. And, that's against current code, but at one point in time, it was standard practice.
Right.
And during rain events, it leads to a incredible volume of inflow and infiltration.
yeah, I thought we
But-
had commissioned that study for some reason, but yeah, I won't train side, let's go ahead.
We need to study on this.
Yeah, study our studies.
So when we look at our existing rates, our sewer bills are still relatively low despite the increases we've had in recent years. Now, Lawrence is slightly lower, although I can tell you we're doing a study for Lawrence and theirs will be going up too this year. Theirs goes up every year as well. But, in general, our sewer rates are still relatively low compared to other similar communities in the region. So again, to financial plan scenarios for the sewer utility. Scenario 1 being relying on transfers from the gaming fund for 5 more years, but phasing them out. And scenario 2, kind of the cold turkey, let's rip the Band-Aid off, more immediate elimination of gaming fund. Now, here on the sewer utility, when we did our study back in 2017, there was no transfer from gaming fund to sewer. And just in the past year or two, they've started to transfer, I want to say $500,000 a year of gaming fund off the top of my head to sewer to help pay for some of the capital projects there. And so you can see, again, the gold bars here are the gaming fund transfers. They're less dramatic here in part because there's not a single large project like the water treatment plant on the water side, but it is making up a portion of the revenue for sewer. So on the sewer side for scenario 1, which is the gradual increases, we still need to raise rates pretty significantly, 15% a year for a couple of years, and then we're proposing 12% before leveling off at 7%, and then after that we expect it to be inflationary. Now, part of the reason this is a little more dramatic, and you see that dark blue bar is above all the bars, is because we basically have nothing in the bank account on sewer, and we need to fix that as well. So this isn't just a question of paying for capital. This is a question of the sewer fund really doesn't have a significant amount of balance in it, what we'd like to have, what I talked about earlier. 90, 120 days, somewhere around there. So you can see at the end of 2027, we've basically gotten that fund up to the point that it's finally a healthy balance. And then that's why I would expect that 7% should be more level, but that's somewhat dependent on, to caution you, on the findings of the master plan. But, you know, that's something we'll determine when that is ready. I'm sorry. Did you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. Are you still going on? I have a comment about the rate scenarios, but do you have more to present?
Yeah, let me, how about I finish the scenarios and then we'll get to that. So, you know, we're proposing those increases be across the board, which means that basically every customer would be see a similar 15% increase. So a typical residential customer would go from $38 a month to, in 2027, under scenario 1, their rates would almost double to $75. But again, looking back, then we'll be probably about maybe average for the area. Still below where Kansas City is today. And theirs will continue to go up every year as they do. In terms of CIP funding, again, it's really weaning ourselves off gaming fund and having more rate-funded capital so that by 2027, all the capital improvements, which are about $1.5 million a year in this fund, it varies a little year to year, would be funded by the rates themselves instead of relying on gaming fund transfers. So financial plan scenario 2 is a little more dramatic, has higher increases the first 2 years, but actually lower increases following years. So it's really just taking the pain up front here and then getting to, even though 7%, I don't want to dismiss that, it's certainly more palatable than the higher increases. And you can see here, again, this is driven by not just the need to fund capital, but the fact that the sewer the sewer enterprise fund doesn't have a balance right now. So similarly, rates would be across the board, what we those percentages we propose. And in terms of the actual impact on bill, we actually get to about the same place on sewer. It's just, on scenario 2, it's just more dramatic, but you can see actually in 2027, the rate itself is almost the same as in scenario 1. There's not as much different on the rate here as there was on water when we looked at that 250 difference. So this is my final prepared slide, and this, I think, you know, it's hard. I know I've been talking about a lot of numbers, and, you know, one thing I did focus on is, you know, kind of where we're at relative to other communities. But even looking at then the scenarios we're talking about for 2022. Right now, our bills are the lowest among anybody. Water, as I've said, is very low. Sewer is pretty low, and when you combine them overall, when people get their water bill, which is water and sewer combined, that's what everybody calls it pretty much, it's a relatively low bill when you compare it to any other community in the region. And even with the increases, whether it's scenario 1 or the more dramatic scenario 2, our bills would still be low compared to other communities in the region. And so that's the end of my prepared presentation, so I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
I will kick off. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I do think at some point we should be looking at the bio-auction demand and suspended solid surcharges, especially if it's an increasing percent.
Yeah, and those definitely need to be looked at. The big challenge we're facing is there's some concern about some of how we're measuring that because it's imprecise. So water meters are pretty accurate. Sewer meter that we use to pay for our flow to Kansas City should be pretty accurate, although we're going to take a close look at that since it's a new meter is what I've been told. The sampling for BOD and suspended solids is not as accurate. And there's some concern because when you look at how much it's increased in the past several years, either Ingredion is putting a lot more in, which may be the case, and they have been measuring it. But the challenge is we don't measure all their flow. We are only getting good measurements from them maybe 15 out of 30 days a month. And so it's something that, we want to take a closer look at the data and make sure that that's really accurate because there's the way we charge our rates may need to better match what Kansas City is charging us for those surcharges, which they don't do right now, and that's a concern that we have. And so that in particular is something that we need to take a much closer look at than is typically done in a study like this.
Perfect.
And
Thank-
I'll jump
I'm
on
sorry.
that. I mean, that is that extended service that we were talking about.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to kind of kick off. 'Cause I
Absolutely.
always like to bring that one
If-
up.
I'm happy to bring that forward, should the city council direct me so.
Councilmember Clevenger.
Couple of things. First of all, thank you for your presentation. As far as I'm concerned, definitely we, as a city, I think it's a good practice to get away from using gaming funds for day-to-day operations and utilities. The gaming fund is typically for capital improvements. Whatever scenario we come up with, I'm kind of in favor of a more slow, gradual of the 5 years, using a little bit of the gaming funds to kind of get until we raise the rates enough to get the fund self-sufficient. Like I said before, we lowered the water rates to kind of offset the sewer rates increase. And I know with the sewer, we are at the mercy of Kansas City. To build us a sewer plant would be astronomical. So, we definitely ship it to Kansas City. But as far as, my opinion would be to kind of use the 5-year plan scenario 1. And definitely, like Jesse said, the I&I, we're going to study that, which is good. So that's my opinion.
Councilmember Smith.
A few things out of me. So the I&I and the meter accuracy are critical. Like we need that information ASAP. I like I said, I thought we had already asked for that study, but if it's going to happen, like as soon as we can get it approved, that would be wonderful. Second thing, so is the trajectory we're setting it on, is that to get us back to that 25% buffer in the fund? Is there a reason for 25%?
It's an individual decision. I had one client in Virginia who had a lot of money in the bank, and the discussion we were having with them was whether it should be 1.5 years or 2 years. I believe that's excessive for most utilities because it should be a responsible amount. Just so again, thinking about the utility being a self-sufficient enterprise, and again here the one benefit you have is even the 3 months, 90 days is pretty low, quite frankly, but if anything ever happened here, I know you guys have the gaming fund as a backup, and you can always go to that.
Right.
You have that discretion. So that's why even here, it's more comfortable being at 90 days than for most other utilities, quite frankly.
Okay.
And you can see the water fund is already at that. The sewer fund doesn't even have, they're at 2 weeks.
Right. So the 25%, you framed it in number of days. How does 25% compare to 90 days?
25% and 90 days are basically the same.
One and the same.
Yeah.
It is the city's policy.
Right.
That
I'm
was
just-
something, yes.
It's been set long before any of us came on. I didn't know if that's what you recommend is 25% buffer.
That's kind of the minimum we ever recommend.
Okay.
And here, like I said, I'm more comfortable at the minimum than many other communities because of the kind of the backup funding that we have, if you will.
Okay, and one more. I noticed that through all of this, there's no debt mentioned in any of it.
Right.
So in thinking about the fact that a lot of this is capital improvement driven, we've got sewer stuff that's crumbling, we have an uncertain
Yep.
water infrastructure. These are problems that have cropped up over years and now will be the responsibility of the current resident base. Bonds can spread that impact out, and debt has never been cheaper than it
That's-
is right now. So I'm curious why there's not debt proposed in this plan to smooth out the impact.
That's an excellent question. The main reason there's not debt in here is because the capital improvements that are in this plan currently are relatively modest, and they're really just kind of recapitalization of the system. And when you think about recapitalization, it's typically good policy to try to fund that with revenues instead of borrowing for that. However, that being said, something we actually discussed in our last meeting that I said, with money being as cheap as it is, it may not be a bad idea for you to consider doing one big, project, especially to replace, the worst 10% of your sewer collection system, the worst 10% of your water distribution system, but that's going to be somewhat dependent on those master plans, I would say, and what they identify.
Sure.
Yeah,
And I think you need that to make that decision. But for the type of capital we have, I think it's better policy to pay for that with current revenues is what I would classify it as. Because right now, we have really only kind of ongoing rehabilitation, not large capital projects that are better suited for debt. But you're right, and that's one of the reasons I often, I have some customers who are debt adverse, but when it comes to, building something that's going to last 30 years, it makes a lot of sense to use debt because there's people who haven't even been born yet who will get benefit when they live in North Kansas City in 25 years of stuff you build today. And how do we get them to pay for it? We use debt that's not paid for 25 years.
Right, and that's sort of the route I'm going, because our water infrastructure, for example, we're scared to move valves because they might blow up on us. So if we're going to ever do large-scale replacement of this stuff, again, money has and will likely never be cheaper than
Yeah.
it is right now. So I know this is getting into a larger plan,
Yep.
but I would like to see debt considered as a means to move forward on some of these kind of projects.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. It's just for the types of capital that are in our plan that we've been given until that master plan is done. I think, in general, you're better served to pay for it with current revenues. But
Okay.
yes, when we identify larger projects, because that was the discussion we had with the water plant 4 years ago, when we were looking at $11, $12 million. Do we use debt? Do we use gaming fund? Do we borrow from gaming fund? And that was a discussion we had in more detail then.
Sure.
I'll just kind of interject here real quick. As mentioned before, we're going to have 3 studies. Typically speaking, debt is required to go to the voters for approval. I would like to go forward with a really very well-formed, clear communication plan of if we were to choose to issue debt, here is the work plan, here is a schedule, here is the many years of expanded infrastructure that we would be proposing to those voters.
Yeah.
So, and I do anticipate when we go through these three study years, we are going to learn a lot about ourselves. We're going to learn a lot about our infrastructure. And I do think debt probably will have to be a conversation that the city council will have to either entertain or like they did before, does the gaming fund pay for this? I think
Right.
that would be a decision for the future council to consider. But I don't think that would play into this particular rate structure. But we are mindful at the staff level that as we go through those rate studies, we're probably going to learn about a lot of infrastructure and a lot of the needs that we just don't know right now.
Sure. Yeah, that's a 4-letter word until you really explain what's going on. So that makes a lot of sense. I just would like to see it as a smoothing use.
Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you for the presentation. That was very, very good for me. I read through the document. I was like, and this kind of smooths it all out for me. I'm of the opinion that I think we should rip the Band-Aid off and become self-sufficient as quickly as possible. The first 2 years are a little shocking, but then when we get after that, we're talking a couple bucks a year of increases, and it just makes sense, I think, to get self-sufficiency as quickly as possible and get away from using the gaming fund. The gaming fund, I think, it's kind of ridiculous that we're using it for what it is. I understand why it happened, but I don't think that this is the correct use of that funds. I think we should, try to rip the Band-Aid off. It's going to stink for a couple of years, but again, we're so low in comparison. Having lived in Kansas City most of my life, my water bill was never this cheap. It's comically cheap, actually. So I think it's time to, look at those upgrades and really become self-sufficient as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Councilmember Toll.
Second.
I, too, would be in favor of that, except that your own recommendation shows that that's not a good choice. So if we went with scenario 2 on the water bill, we dip down to having only 3 days of reserve per year, right?
How a sewer bill would,
Yeah, and, one thing we could consider is we try to keep simple scenarios here, but maybe we compromise with 2 years or something to help that fund balance, absolutely. I can go to that slide, maybe. Yeah, so this is basically under either scenario for sewer, it's
Oh, you're
not
right, I was on
good.
the wrong one. It was for sewer.
drops to 2 under the.
But this was 38, I'm sorry, I did still mean the water, but it's 38 for
yes.
2023 and 70 for 2024, and your recommendation was 90 to
Which
120, correct?
yeah, 90, which matches your 25% policy, right?
Okay, so if we were just looking at that recommendation, then we would want to go with scenario 1, correct?
Yes, or you could go with a scenario in between, maybe to smooth it somewhere in between, but we're trying to keep it simple for, ultimately, this is a work session to discuss ideas, and we can kind of refine it, or just kind of better flesh out one of these scenarios, whichever we're directed to do.
Okay,
Councilmember Saper. I'm sorry, Lisa, did you have any?
no,
Okay, Councilmember Saper.
With the information that we've gotten tonight, and with the questions that have been opened up that we're now looking at, it seems to me there are enough unanswered items in the whole concept of what we're doing here, that it'd be better to have a very, almost, not a scenario 1 or 2, but scenario 0.5, which is until we get the full picture of what's going on with our I&I, and actually what the costs are overall within our system. And I would suggest that we go slow on this until we have more information. We make some changes. Again, to put it dramatically, scenario 0.5, in which we keep gaming fund coming in at current or maybe a higher level for the next fiscal year and for the purposes of our budgeting. And I would hope by the end of that time, we would have this information that we need to decide if we need to pull the Band-Aid off, as some have suggested.
Do we have to set
Or
rates
not.
annually? Is that,
We have to set, yes, rates
Yeah,
annually.
annually.
and that's coming up
Yes, it is, sir.
when? I believe it's on my.
October.
October. Thank you. Did you have anything further?
No, and I would suggest going slow and making the changes.
Did you have anything to add to that?
No, the only thought is because we are proposing a trifecta of reports that will take 3 years for the city to complete.
It would take 3?
Does the city have the capacity to financially conduct them? Yes. Does the city have the staffing ability to perform all 3 reports with excellence? No.
Okay.
Councilmember Clevenger, please.
Just a couple of things. First of all, from being on the council before, I think we've talked about debt before, and Matt Webster had stated that since we have one large customer in Gradion with 56%, that it may not be an attractive debt. I'm not sure if staff has any idea of that, or definitely talk to Matt Webster on that, but just throw that out there. Certainly we want to become these funds self-sufficient, but we'd also have to think about our residents and our residents on a fixed income as well, and how that's going to take. I know we don't want to use gaming income, and we've really kind of gotten away from doing that, but I think this is, something that we need to look at hard, but I'm still in favor of scenario 1, but there's different opinions, so just wanted to throw that out there on the debt, that we were always told that with that one large customer, it may not be a good idea to issue debt. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm a registered municipal advisor, and I can provide you advice on debt. And in general, when you consider municipal debt, the municipal debt market in the United States is a gigantic market. And the highest rated debt is general obligation debt, which is backed by the full faith and credit of a city. The next highest municipal debt is water and sewer debt, because water and sewer is an essential service, and it's generally considered that no matter what happens, you can always just raise the water and sewer rates, and customers will pay for it because it's an essential service, and so it's actually rated very high. And so generally, water and sewer, and I've had other customers with other clients with large industrial customers like Ingredion, and it's never prevented them from getting a very good debt rating.
Councilmember Smith.
I'll put one more just nail in the debt discussion. I know that we got 3 years worth of studies coming up, but I would encourage us to get to that decision point as quickly as possible because the market is rapidly changing. If we wait 3 years, we'll be looking at likely significantly higher rates. Taxes, the new tax policies will be settled. Right now, municipal debt is attractive because of its tax implications. So I would just say let's not wait too long to get that discussion started.
We'll get that done in Infrastructure Week.
There you go. And then the second part is I would also favor scenario 2. Let's get it moving. We're an outlier on the low end right now. Let's get the funds shored up, and if we learn through these plans that I&I it can be fixed, or if we can, if the meter's just giving us completely wrong information, this will all be to our benefit, and then we can dial it back. So I'd say let's go.
All right, do we have further council member comments? I kind of heard a little bit of a split.
I was about ready to say, could I get,
Hands.
Did we?
could I get a little bit
anybody else
clearer
wanna-
council direction of what you'd like to see us bring forward?
3 on scenario 2 so far.
Yeah.
4 on
Scenario
scenario 2. Where you at, Graves?
I'm personally would prefer scenario 2, but it's tugging at me that we do have a lot of residents that are fixed income, low income, and then I know, I'm a landlord, rental properties, even if you're a landlord and you pay the people's water bill, if the rate goes up, you're gonna increase rent on people. And I guess if I had to sit here and choose, I would say scenario 1, just trying to look out for people that are low income and fixed income.
4.
Oh, you're counting.
Yeah.
In kind of perfect world hybrid. But I don't
Yeah.
know. That's. What's the timeline? I'm sorry. Did you have more to add?
Actually, I do have something to add. You said hybrid, and I got to thinking when he was doing his scenarios, is there a way we could do like scenario 1 on water, scenario 2 on sewer, or something along those lines, and actually do?
That's what I was going to ask. What the
hybrid?
timeline is on us deciding this? Are we going to have an opportunity to discuss this again in some way? What are you envisioning here, Kim, or anybody?
So I hate to put my colleague here on spot, but would you be able to, kind of hearing some of the consensus of maybe
Yeah.
bring forward something at the August 17th city council meeting for discussion?
Yes, I believe so. I have to check my calendar only because I want to say I
I
might
hate to
have something
kind
else
of
that evening.
put him on the spot here, but we are underneath a little bit of a time
Yeah.
crunch. One of the time crunches as well is we owe you the budget that same day as the next council meeting.
We're playing on
So-
scenario 1.5 here.
Well, and one thing I would point out is, again, you guys only approve 1 year of rate increase at a time. And as we've talked about a lot of times, we're trying to set a plan, but recognizing we're going to know more next year when we get around to this. And quite frankly, you can't raise rates too much in this first year, under either scenario. And so it's kind of like we could do scenario 2, but try to scale it back maybe next year. Because our bills, again, I hate to keep harping on this, but it's an important point. Our bills are just so low right now compared to everybody else's. We go to scenario 2, it's a $12.50 a month increase. I understand there's people on fixed income that's significant for, but in the long run, that's not going to be too much. It's going to more be a question of, well, maybe next year we can do a smaller increase than we would otherwise do.
We do love our small bills, but we have to cover our expenses for sure, especially
Yeah.
in these enterprise accounts.
Yeah.
You want to do hands?
So we can potentially maybe throw some scenarios. Even if we can probably take some basic. What's the most immediate need year 1? What would you say the most immediate need to see on year 1?
I would like to see what your consensus would be on the year 1, understanding that perhaps on years 2 through 5, we come back for discussion on the 17th. But if the city council could come to some form of consensus to direct staff, again, we are underneath a little bit of a timetable with, I owe you a proposed budget. So under scenario 2, it would be proposed increases for the fiscal year 2022, water 20%, sewer 25%. Under scenario 1, it's 9 and 15 respectively.
Councilmember Smith.
I'm holding up scenario 2.
Oh, I thought we were doing peace
If
signs here.
if we're looking for consensus for first year, we have a whole nother year to address. We can get a general trajectory, but we'll know a lot more by then. 2 is is where we need to go now to get things shored back
I know
up.
Roberts is at 2,
I'm a 1.
you're at
Graves a
1.
1. Saper?
2, 2, 2, 2. All right, we got 3 2s. Any more 2s? Any more 2s? Oh, there's a 2. There's a 2. All right, got 4 2s. One more 2. One more 2. Was that a 1? That's a 1. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, we're getting ready to split the deck here. Saper. Ooh, he likes the 1.5.
Well, then twos take it, right?
Well, 2 would take it on one side, but not the other. Would be split unless Saper's got a lot of weight here.
Saper has a 1/2.
Ooh, here. Oh.
0.5.
All right, Kim. Sounds like you got very clear direction. Are we good? No, I'm kidding.
Councilmember Graves, did you mean that you wanted one number for water and a different number for sewer?
When I listened to the presentation, I took notes. If it was up to me, which it's really not, I would go scenario 1 on water and scenario 2 on sewer. I would quit cold turkey on the sewer and then just kind of scale back on the gaming funds on the water, just to do a more gradual rate increase. Because we need to get off the gaming funds, but I feel like cold turkey might hurt people that are at risk of, there are people that $1 a day makes a big difference too, believe it or not. So.
And I do think in the end we definitely have an opportunity to do justice for 4 or 5 years down the road, as you said, as we get farther into all these individual aspects. And these aren't all going to occur at the same time either, I don't believe. This is going to be a trip. We're just going to keep learning.
This will be just like any budget. It will evolve. As we learn more and as we adjust, we'll have to come forward. And every year, this council will make the decision of what the next year's rate will be. So, Mr. Graves, I think that your thought is water at 9, sewer at 25.
Yes.
That's a difference of 70 cents monthly versus just doing scenario 2. Yeah. I mean, if we do scenario 2 versus doing the split, it's 70 cents more per month.
We're only talking $5.50 total difference between the two.
Right. And the bigger chunk is the sewer. Like, the bigger chunk adjustment is the sewer, and it sounds like there's decent consensus on going 2 on sewer. And then we're arguing over 70 cents a month.
I mean, we're going up regardless. It's $6.50 or $6.66 essentially from 53.
Yeah.
So it's like we're already jumping 12. We might as well jump 17 and do it.
Yeah, that's fine. Go scenario 2. Yeah, it's only about, I'm looking here.
Scenario.
I mean, the first year, which is basically what we're talking about right now, is 2022. There's a difference of,
70 cents in water.
Oh, he's pulling it here. What do we got?
it's like $1.50 if I'm looking at this correctly, between scenario 1 and 2 on water.
1849 versus 1770.
I'm looking at 2022 forecast for 5/8 inch, which is like your fixed income people in a bungalow. It goes from $16.16 scenario 1 versus $17.79.
Right.
I see.
Correct.
I can't watch these numbers anymore.
So it's about $1.50, which, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I can live with that. So scenario 2, so.
I am hearing consensus. Kim, would you like to add anything else?
I appreciate the council's work tonight. Thank you.
Tom, thank you again for the presentation.
thank you for having me.
Appreciate everyone's work. This meeting is adjourned. I will remind everyone we will be back for our regular session after a.
Brief recess.
I'm waiting for their number. Should we
5 minute.
fight over this? 5 minute break. 5 minute break. We will be back after 5 minutes. This meeting is
Looking forward to
adjourned.
these master plan